Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and I'm here with another Sunday sew along. So today is day one of our new sew along. We'll be sewing through Vogue 8772. I'll pop that up there. This is also the pattern that I'm currently using in a one pattern 3 ways series. So I apologize if I get a little confused. I'm filming everything like out of sync with how you're watching it because of, you know, in order for me to explain things in the sew along, but then you've actually already seen the finished shirt, which is not normally how I do my sew along. So anyway, things are getting a little confusing just with me filming out of order and putting things back in order, and then filming intros for videos of footage I've already done. Anyway, I apologize if I get confused or say anything that gets confusing as far as the timeline is concerned. Anyway, so yes, one pattern 3 ways. You've already seen this finished top. I showed that on Friday's video. I'll pop a link up to that one if you'd like to go ahead and see the finished top if you haven't seen that already. And this is shirt 2 out of my one pattern 3 ways. The previous shirt was the time before, and I'll actually link to that video here in a little bit because that is some fitting. So typically in these first videos of my sew along, I do a whole, you know, getting your supplies, fabric, all that kind of stuff. And then also we usually do a muslin and fitting and pattern alterations. That's a little different this time just because of the nature of the one pattern 3 ways. So if you would like to see the video on how I fit this shirt, I will pop that link up now, which is also the video to the first shirt 1 that I did of this one pattern 3 ways. So that kind of gives you an idea of the different, sorry, my eyeball. This weather has been so dry this winter. I mean, air-wise, we have over a foot of snow on the ground outside right now, so not so dry out there. Anyway, so the fitting issues, the fitting that we did, not fitting issues, well, my fitting issues, but the fitting alterations that I did were on that video. And then on Friday's video, I actually showed you how I've altered the sleeve of this second version. So today we'll be doing, or for the sew along, we'll be doing version B. I think A and B are basically the same thing. It's just A uses contrasting fabrics and B doesn't. And I'm not going to be using contrasting fabrics. I'm just using the one. So we're doing version B on this one, but I have altered the sleeve to give a more voluminous sleeve to kind of give it that balloon sleeve where it's real big and then goes into the cuff. So I have altered the sleeve pattern a little bit, and I showed you how I did that on Friday. So I will pop, well, I've already popped a card in for that. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I have been treating my eyes, and I sit down, I think it's the lights. They really dry my eyeballs out. Okay, so for today we're going to be talking about more in depth about the fabric, more specifically sewing with slippery, shifty, whatever you want to call it, fabrics, whether that be silks or if you're using a rayon or even, I guess, a polyester. So yeah, we'll be talking a little bit about that, and then cutting out our pattern today. We're not going to be doing any sewing today. That will start next week, and then we'll delve in. I don't foresee this being a very long sew along, maybe just, I think the last sew along for the coat was 8 weeks long. This one's probably only going to be about 3. So yeah, let's dive in. Okay, Vogue 8772 is a blouse pattern. Let's talk about fabric first, and then we'll talk kind of a little bit more about the notions, and then more specifically treating the fabric that I'm going to be using. So we're going to be doing, like I mentioned, view B, which is the button-up shirt with the pussy bow blouse, so the pussy bow on the front, or the bow collar on the front. Now, typically, you would think that most of these would be made with more blouse weight fabrics, such as I'll be using a silk crepe de chine, a charmeuse, whether that be silk or polyester, any kind of crepes, whether that be polyester or silk, rayon chalets, wool chalets, if you can find a wool chalet. That's a lovely drapier, not as drapey as a rayon chalet, but a lovely drapey fabric that would really show this bow off to you know, be nice and drapey. Kind of more what you would think of for this type of project. However, I have been in the process of doing some research for my spring video where I do looks for spring, whether that be ready to wear or street style looks that I find, and then I paired them with patterns, and I came across Bowden has these blouses. It's the same blouse, just in 2 different colorways or 2 different fabrics, and I'll show you, I'll pop a picture in here right now, which is like a shirting. So it's like a cotton shirting weight. So you could really do this. I love it. I love the crisp bow. I think that's so cool, and I think I totally might do that with this pattern, and make one out of a Liberty maybe, or any kind of nice woven cotton shirting. You could even do, like a gingham would be kind of cool, I think. You know, more, I like the juxtaposition when you mix very traditional menswear with more women's wear type silhouettes. So if you did like a real menswear inspired or a menswear shirting, whether that be like a pinstripe or Oxford cloth or something that is very menswear-esque, and then make it in that real feminine bow collared top, I think that that could be really cool as well. So yeah, you don't have to just use drapey fabrics for this version. You could definitely use more structured fabrics to get a really cool look. And the shirt that I made last week, yes, I used a lightweight denim for that one, obviously a more bodied, crisper fabric, but you could make that one out of silk as well. In fact, I had a couple of questions on that, and yes, if you made that shirt out of a silk, you could make it out of the fabric that I'll be using for this one, definitely. They were asking about interfacing. I would just use the same interfacing that I'm going to talk about today for your collar stand. You would still interface your button bands and your cuffs, which is the same that you would interface for your cotton shirtings and stuff as well. So yeah, sky's kind of the limit on this, which is very exciting. But I am going to be using this gorgeous digital printed silk crepe de chine from Minerva. I don't know, there's not really a right or wrong side. I mean, I'll pick one as the right or wrong side, but anyway. So it's digitally printed with like the sequined rhinestone print. So beautiful. I'm so excited to have this as a blouse in my wardrobe. But it is like a digital photograph almost on some silk crepe de chine. It is wider silk crepe de chine. So this is probably 52 inches wide, I would think, maybe 54. Which is nice because a lot of times your silks come in the narrower widths, the 44 widths. But it is a little bit of a slipperier fabric, and so I've had a lot of questions on how I sew with these. So a couple of tips. It's really not that much different. It maybe requires just a little bit more patience. I know that there's a lot of, as in all things sewing, there's a lot of different, you know, recommendations on, you know, laying a piece of like tracing paper out, then putting your silk down, then putting another piece of paper, you know, tracing paper on top, and then cutting through like a sandwich to cut your patterns out. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can treat silk. I'm just showing you the way that I do it. I am a less fussy sewer. I just, maybe I'm impatient. I must just be impatient. But yes, I have to be in the right frame of mind to do any kind of fussy sewing, if that makes sense. Anything very particular, you know, the hand basting and stuff. I just have to, I like doing that stuff on occasion. I just have to be in the right frame of mind. Typically, I'm kind of just want to get in there and get it done. I want it to be done correctly, but you know, the less fuss, the better for my personality. So the way I treat slipperier fabrics, and again, this goes for any of your rayons, even your tencels. If you've got like a tencel shirting weight, like a lighter weight tencel twill, you could definitely use something like that. Those are shifty. So my number one recommendation is cut it out single layer. It's really hard to get those when you're folding them over on themselves to stay on grain and not to shift. It's also really easy, especially with a silk, if you get everything on grain and you've got everything all situated, and then you lay your pattern pieces on, and then you walk by and it causes just enough wind and it makes the upper layer like whoof, lift up, and then everything is like off again. They're so frustrating. I've been there. So as tempting as it is to try and just cut things out double layer, I pretty much, when it comes to my slipperier fabrics, will do it single layer. You're just better able, number one, to conserve fabric. You can wedge your pieces in a little, nestle your pieces in a little bit better, and use better use of fabric when you cut out single layer, but also it's just easier to keep everything on grain. So that is my number one tip. Number two, and this goes especially, probably more for rayons than anything, and tencels more than anything else, because they are very heavy fabrics. So even though they have the beautiful drape of a silk's a much lighter weight fabric, and it doesn't distort as easily. Now you can get into some charmeuses that are a little bit heavier because of the satin side, just the way it's woven, where they can be just a little bit heavier, and you may run into that, but I find that rayons can lose their shape easier than any other fabric, in my experience. So my recommendation for that, if you are using a rayon, because they are more cost effective, or a tinsel or a lyocell or any of those natural fibers that have been man manipulated, my recommendation is to handle them as little as possible. So cut it out and then immediately take it over, stay stitch your necklines, stay stitch, you know, if you're doing a sleeveless top, you know, to get your armhole stay stitched. That kind of stuff. So get all of that done, you know, almost directly from the cutting table to the sewing machine to get your stay stitching in. When I'm doing my interfacing, like my collar pieces, for instance, they go directly from, I cut out my interfacing pieces first, so that I can cut out, when I'm cutting out my fabric, I can cut out that collar piece and go directly to the ironing board and get that interfacing fused pretty much right away. It just helps to keep things from distorting. The more you touch, the more you move those pieces, the better the chance of things stretching out and distorting. So that is kind of my number one recommendation. Touch it as little as possible, and just kind of be patient with them. That's really the biggest thing when it comes to sewing with slippery fabrics. Now I've got some tricks here, but that's kind of my biggest tips. You know, it's just not as hard as you might think. And yeah, the more that you work with those kind of fabrics, the easier it becomes. They'll always give you more headaches, obviously, than a cotton, but it definitely gets easier the more you work with them. Yeah, it's just a more delicate touch, kind of. So in that, as far as sewing, I use a size 10 needle when I am doing anything with my silks, my lighter weight rayons, pretty much probably any of the slinkier fabrics that I might use. I will use a size 10 needle. Also, if you're using a home machine, now my industrial machine, I don't have access to the Microtech needles, which are just really sharp. Schmetz has a really good Microtech needle that if I were using my home machine, I would definitely use that. Also, if you're using a home machine, my industrial machine does not have a walking foot, but if you do have access to a walking foot, especially with a home machine, I don't really have an issue with things creeping on my industrial machine, but definitely if I were using my home machine, I would have my walking foot on. That feeds fabric evenly from the top and the bottom, so you've got feed dogs working on both, so it helps just feed things through a little bit better. You have less stretching out, and it keeps things from sliding and slipping around too much, because that is the other nature. You know, this is slipperier fabric, so sometimes it doesn't, you know, wants to shift away from each other. So yes, a Microtech needle is very good because it's nice and sharp, so it'll really pierce and make nice, beautiful stitches. I use a polyester thread. I use Guterin Mara 100 for 90%, 95% of my sewing. And that's what I'll be using on this silk blouse as well. I know that there's a lot of school of thought that, you know, natural thread with natural fibers. I just always use polyester thread and everything and have never had an issue. So there you have it. Now, my sewing mentor was adamant. I got all of her old silk thread, and I wanted it for basting purposes because silk thread pulls through fabric really well, just for any hand basting. I really would like to do a French jacket, like a Chanel style jacket at some point, but she told me that she would give me all of her old silk thread, but only if I promised never to sew a seam with it. So silk is an extremely strong fiber. In fact, fun fact, silk will dull your scissors or any kind of cutting blade much faster than paper or any other fiber. In fact, the very first bulletproof vests were made with layers of silk. It is just a very strong fiber. So silk thread is a very strong thread. However, over time, and they notice this in a lot of historical garments where they have used silk thread, it saws through the seam allowance because it is so strong. And eventually the fiber just can't take the rubbing and the moving back and forth along that sewn line. So yes, my mentor always told me never sew seams with silk thread. It's fine for hand basting, but yeah, don't use it for your projects. So there you have it. Now, as far as cotton thread, I do know that there are quite a few people that will use cotton thread on their silk garments. That's kind of up to you. I just prefer polyester thread, and that's what I use. So that's what I'll be using on this project. Also, with my interfacing, I primarily use two different kinds of interfacing. They're both Palmer Pletsch. The So Sheer, or what is it called? I always get the name confused. I'm using the sheer version of their fusible interfacing. I use their medium weft for my heavier stuff and for a lot of my tailoring projects. But yes, I use their, I think it's called So Sheer. I'll have it linked down below, but I use that, I'll be using that for this project, and I I used it for my other shirt, and I will also be using it for this. If you want a crisper shirt collar, like more of a like a man's shirt where it's like a really crisp collar, Fashion Sewing Supply is a fantastic resource for really any fusibles. They've got fantastic fusible interfacings as well. I mean, really, really good. But they've got a shirt crisp, I think is what it's called, in a couple of different weights. That's a really good one if you're wanting just a little bit more crisp. They also have some lighter weight fusible interfacings that are good, and I'll link their shop down below, their online store as well. They've got a lot of really good fusibles, and they're nice and wide as well. So those are just a couple of different options. Okay, when it comes to cutting out my silk, you know, this is really when using silk or something a little more slippery might be a little bit more challenging, especially when you're cutting out. So other than sewing with my fabric on a single layer, you'll notice, I mean, obviously silk has a lot of drape. Same with rayon, you could do this with rayon. But one thing that I have learned, gosh, I don't even know where I've picked this one up. Also, I need to make sure I'm focusing on my face there. Spray starch. Now, you can make your own. I know that there's stuff that quilters use, whatever. There's probably 100 different ways, different types of starch if you want to use. I know that there is water-soluble starch. I know people that use gelatin, that will dissolve gelatin in like a big tub and then soak their fabric in it. There's a whole bunch of different ways. You could definitely Google that. I just use a regular old spray starch. Old school spray starch that you would use for any men's shirt or whatever. This is the Niagara brand. It's the one, my brother-in-law is actually, it's so funny, he's in construction, but he is a nut when it comes to ironing his clothing. And he bought a bottle of this to leave at my house so that when they come to visit, he would have his starch here. I mean, the man irons everything. It's so funny because he's such a big burly guy and then just really likes a good pressed garment. He does all my sister's ironing as well. Anyway, this is the heavy finish. Yeah, I'm gonna be using this. So what I do is I actually lay out a towel on top of my pressing surface just because I don't want the starch on, you know, starch can build up on your iron and that kind of stuff. And I just don't want it on my pressing surface for other projects. So I do put a towel down on top of my pressing surface that I can easily wash. Before any of this, forgot to mention this, I washed and dried this in the dryer. This is silk crepe de chine. I washed it on delicate, and then I did pop it into a delicate cycle on my dryer to dry it. Now going forward with any blouse I make out of this, I will hand wash it, probably in the hand wash cycle actually. I'll put it in a lingerie bag in a hand wash cycle on my machine and wash it, and then it will air dry. And then I will steam it or press it as necessary from that point. But yeah, I put it in the dryer just in case it were to accidentally get in the dryer, it wouldn't be ruined. This is also great because it keeps your silk from spotting. So if this ever gets wet when I'm out and about, I don't have to worry about water just spotting my silk. So because I've done that, I can, when I go to iron this before, because I iron my fabric before I cut it out all the time. I mean, I always do that. Just you want it as flat and on grain as possible, but I will spray it with the starch and then iron it per normal. So I'm going to show you the difference. So as you can see right now, you know, it's very loose, drapey, you know, it's very slippery. It actually feels lovely. I can't wait to put this into a blouse, but this is it out of the, you know, it's been washed, it's been dried, and then when you see it at the cutting table here in a second, it will have been starched, and I'll show you the difference. So that is, yes, that is what I do. And once you have starched it, it pretty much acts like a lightweight cotton. So then the whole time you're sewing, you're pretty much using a lightweight cotton. And then when I'm finished making the blouse, I will wash it, hand wash it again, let it air dry, press it, and then it will be good as new. Then the starch is out. So that's what I do. That is how I, the really shifty stuff that I am having issues with, that is how I combat that. Spray starch is my secret weapon. But again, I know that people make their own spray starch. There's 100 different ways that you can starch your fabric. So yeah, whatever is, you know, I know there's some more environmentally friendly ways. So kind of whatever is your jam. Yeah, but I highly suggest starching in some way or form your fabric to make it stiffer, because it just makes it so much easier to sew. And you'll be able to see that as we go through sewing this. Another thing to note before we go to the cutting table to cut out, I'm gonna be doing French seams on this blouse just because I haven't done a project with French seams. I don't think. Have I done any sew along? I don't know if I have or not, to be honest. But this is a good one to try. Serged seams can kind of be a little heavy on the inside of silk garments, especially if there's any translucence at all. You know, you don't really want to see the serged seams. So I think French seams are a beautiful way to finish off a silk blouse and just keep everything looking really nice and tidy on the inside. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be doing French seams on the inside. So I'll show you how I do that with the arms and everything. You could also do flat fill seams, which is a more traditional way of doing a shirt. But yeah, I'll be doing French seams with this one. Okay, guys, that's all I've got for now. I'm going to take you over to the cutting table now, and we're just going to go through the pieces that we're going to cut out, and then I will show you what I have interfaced, and then you should be all ready, set to go, and we will start sewing next week. All right, please leave any questions you have down below, and I'll get those answered as soon as possible. If there's anything else you would like me to address going forward, oh, you're also going to need buttons for this pattern. Can't remember how many off the top of my head, but yes, any kind of shirt sized buttons. I wouldn't go bigger than a 1/2 inch size, but yes, we'll need those because this is a button up shirt front. Also, this sew along we are doing the bow collar, but if you are interested in doing the version with a collar stand and collar, I actually already have, or a tower placket. We're going to be doing the continuous lap placket on this one. I did a tower placket on the last shirt 1, but if you were interested in seeing how those are sewn, because I will not be covering those in this sew along, I'm going to link those videos right here, both the tower placket and then also how to do a collar stand combo as well. I did that in the shirt sew along that I did back in the fall. So the steps are the same. All right, guys, that's all I've got for now. I will meet you at the cutting table, and then I will see you guys again next week for more sew along. Bye. Okay, so here we are at the fabric, and it has been starched, and so you can, I've already laid this out. It has more of a hand of like a cotton lawn now. It's much crisper than it was beforehand. So it's not nearly as drapey as it was, which is gonna make cutting and sewing this so much easier. So that's the benefit of starching your fabric. Now I have this laid out single layer, and I just noticed this is gonna be hard I'm gonna have to measure my grain lines because you can see there's lines here of the sequins, but it's a picture. So, and it's like meant to be like draped fabric on top of this, which I think is really going to mess with my eye when, which normally I can eyeball my grain lines, but I'm probably not going to be able to do that on this one because that's definitely going to mess with my eye, I think. So basically now I'm just going to lay out, and we're going to cut out, I'm not going to show you me cutting out because there's no need. But I have my adjusted front, and I'll be cutting along this bottom line, the cut here for A, B, C, and D. We'll use the bottom line actually for the last shirt, but for this one, we're just doing this same shirt tail hem. So we've got 2 fronts, 1 back on the fold, and I will actually probably cut this one out in the fold. I'll fold the fabric over on itself and cut this one out. Also at the shirt tail hem. 2 sleeves, and here is my adjusted sleeve. 2 cuffs, and these are going to get interfaced. I will also be using 2 strips of interfacing for the front of the shirt for the button band. I will be cutting out 2 of the continuous lap plackets. Those get cut out on grain. And then 2 of these ties. This is the collar for the bow blouse that we are making. It's on the bias. I'm a little nervous about the fabric, to be honest. It'll be fine. We'll make it work. But yes, so that is what I'm going to do. The only thing that's getting interfaced on this top is the cuff and then the button band, which is a grown-on button band on the front of the shirt. So it's I'm going to interface, either right here along this front edge or in between these notches. It doesn't really matter, either or. Okay, so I am going to get this cut out, and I'm going to interface my pieces, and then we'll come back and just go over real quick What else can I say? Oh, another thing. When you're cutting out silk or anything drapey, if you have a cutting mat and a rotary cutter, it is the best way to cut out slippery fabric. Because when you are using pins and scissors, you lift the fabric up to cut with scissors, and that can distort anything that you've laid on grain. So keep that in mind. I think that, I mean, a rotary cutter and cutting mat are my favorite ways to cut everything out, but I know that's not the case for everyone. But I think definitely with slipperier fabrics and with silks, if you have that ability, cutting out with a rotary cutter and a cutting mat is definitely the way to go, because there's no, you don't have to shift, oh, this dog. You don't have to shift the fabric. You don't have to lift it to cut it. So yes, that is definitely my preferred method. If you are going to use scissors, a serrated scissor blade is preferred because it kind of grabs the fabric sometimes with silk and even drapier, slipperier fabrics. When you're cutting, it kind of will push the fabric away. So a serrated scissor kind of grabs it a little better, and you'll get a more true line. So last bit of tips for sewing with slippery stuff. Okay, I'm going to cut these out and I'll come right back just to kind of show you our ending point for today, and then we'll be back next week. Okay, so I have everything cut out and I just want to go through our pieces real quick before we stop for this week. Okay, so I've got my cuff pieces, 2 of them cut out. I just finished interfacing these, which is why it's, and I've used I couldn't remember the name earlier, Perfectfuse sheer, Palmer Pletsch Perfectfuse sheer, which is what I used on the other shirt too, which was obviously heavier weight. I also, now that I have scraps, I want to show you the difference in the weight of the fabric with the starch. Okay, so I have 2 of those, and then over here, I had to be very stingy with my fabric because I've got 2 of these tie pieces, which is the collar of this top, but they get cut on the bias, and they're pretty long. So, I mean, I do have some scraps over here in the corner, but it was a little tight. I was holding my breath there at the end, especially because we altered the sleeve. So the sleeve was bigger than the typical sleeve. So I've got 2 of my sleeve patterns, and I've marked where my continuous lap placket's gonna go. I've got 2 fronts, and I have already gone ahead and put a strip of 1 1/4 inch interfacing there at the front band, and I just put mine at the raw edge. So this gets folded in on itself and then in again, so everything will be enclosed. So you can kind of put that whichever strip you'd like. But there's the front. Again, I've marked my front darts. I will not be sewing the front waist darts though. And then finally, here is my back cut on the fold. I've got my shoulder darts marked, and also my back waist darts, because I will be sewing my back waist darts on the back. Obviously, back waist darts on the back. All right, and then I've also cut 3 strips of bias tape, or bias strips, I guess. I'm going to make bias tape, and I'm going to show you how I make my bias tape. So this is 1 1/8 inch wide. I'm going to be making 1/2 inch single fold bias tape when all is said and done, but which in theory you would have 1 inch wide strips, but I find that it goes through my bias tape maker better if I have just a little bit wider. So this is 1 1/8 inch wide strips, and I have no idea how much I have here. A lot. But yeah, these have just been cut on the bias, 1 1/8 inch wide, and I've got 3 of them, and I will show you when we get to that point how to sew them together, and then how I use my little bias tape maker to make bias tape, and then we'll do how we do the hem. So I like to use bias tape for my shirt tail hems. It's just a little easier. Okay, I want to show you the difference in the fabric, and let me see if I've got, some of the edges didn't get quite as, yeah, starchy. Okay, so here's an edge here, and you can see, you know, it's very fluid. This is pretty much untouched, very slippery. And then you've got an area where it has been, and it's just much, I'm trying to show you the best way to show you, it's just got much more body, a lot more like almost like a silk organza, really. So if you can kind of see the difference. and how those hang. You know, that's very drapey over my finger, whereas that stands away from my finger. I don't know if you can see that at all being above me, but you see how that hardly bends at all there, whereas this, maybe that's the best, is much more flexible. There we go. That's probably the best. So that spray starch really helps make it firm. And these are my scraps that I was able to get some bias tape, and I'll probably finish, I'll just cut the rest of that silk into bias tape for other projects later. So, oh, and also you need 2 of your continuous lap plackets. These get cut on grain. They're just little rectangles to do the sleeve placket. And that is all of the pieces that you'll need. And so the only interfacing we're doing is on the cuffs, and then also the button band there on the front. And I will meet you back here next week, and we'll get this sewn up. One other thing. Sorry, I keep thinking of things. I should make better notes. When you're using any kind of slippery fabric, while silk is much more expensive than polyester, silk is so much easier to sew than polyester. It presses better, it grips better, so even the slippery stuff, even like a charmeuse, super slippery, it grips better than a poly charmeuse. Polyester is just way slipperier than a silk. So that's, I know a lot of, when I was working in the alteration custom sewing business still, I know quite a few fellow seamstresses that would charge more for clients that wanted to use a polyester fabric as opposed to a silk fabric, because it's just so much harder to use than a silk fabric. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. I know it's more expensive, but if you are wanting, and it can be scarier to cut into because it's more expensive, but if you are wanting a, I mean, give yourself a chance with the slippery fabric, and I just find silk much easier to use than the polyester counterpart. So, and there's a lot to be said about polyester. I know that there's different levels of polyester, but it is not my preferred fabric, except in the athletic swimsuit wear type sense. Okay, guys, that is all I've got for today. I will see you all next week. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.